Welcome to Tune In. Welcome to Tune In. Welcome to Tune In. Welcome to Tune In. Good day. Are you sitting down? Because you probably should be. Because this video is going to be awesome. This video is going to be freaking incredible, man. So you should be sitting down. You should be grabbing a snack. You should be going to relax. Because this video is going to be awesome. Thank you for tuning in today. Welcome back to Tunage, where the music never stops, and it's never stopping, baby. Woo! Music doesn't stop in the real world. It's not stopping on this channel. That's right. So, today, we are doing something a little different on Tunage. So, before I get into that, make sure you go like, subscribe, leave a comment if you like it, because I appreciate it. But today, we're doing something different here at Tunage. We are doing a deep dive. And what a deep dive is we dive deep into something that deserves to be dived deep into. We are deep diving into a band that has been rocking the great land of Canada for many, many years. We are diving deep, deep, deep into a band from Canada that has been rocking the land for many, many years. We are going to dive deep into what makes this band one of Canada's greatest bands. We are diving into what makes this band one of Canada's greatest party bands. We are diving into why this band is so Canadian. What makes them so Canadian. And we are diving into why they have such a cult following in Canada. Everyone knows this band. It is the Tragically Hip. That is right, folks. We are talking about the Tragically Hip today. We are diving deeper into what made this band one of Canada's greatest rock bands. Will you join me? I hope you do, because it's going to be a great episode on today's Deep Dive. Yeah. Woo! That worked me up. Gotta take the sweater off. Getting warm in here. Gotta recompose myself. Alright, folks, that is right. We are talking about the Tragically Hip. And more specifically, we are talking about what makes them fucking great. What makes them so damn good. I don't understand what makes them so damn good. Why are they so Canadian? Why does everyone in Canada love this band so much? And, like, no one, like, they're known in the rest of the world, and they're well respected in the rest of the world, but they never truly broke out of Canada, and I think they liked it that way. I think they like being one of Canada's rock bands, one of Canada's greatest rock bands. Now, when I say Canada's greatest rock bands, there's tons. There's thousands, probably. I could sit here and name them all day. Just a quick list off the top of my head. Damn Truth, Yukon Blonde, The Sheepdogs, Bachman Turner Overdrive, April Wine, Rush, Triumph, The Guess Who, millions of others. Okay? Canada has produced some phenomenal music over these thousands of decades, or not thousands of decades, hundreds of decades. And the Tragically Hip is just a footnote in Canadian music, but it's such a big footnote that almost everyone in the country at least knows a song, knows someone who has seen them, knows someone who knows them and loves them. You know, anytime you go to a bar and you say, oh, you know the band Tragically Hip, they're like, oh yeah, my uncle knows them. Literally, I've been to many bars in my life, and every time, you know, they're like, oh, you listen to music? I'm like, yeah. And like, what do you love? And I'm like, well, I love the Tragically Hip. And then immediately they're like, oh yeah, I know who that is. And I want to know why everyone in Canada is like that. What makes them appeal to so many Canadians? Everyone loves the Tragically Hip. And if you don't love the Tragically Hip, give it another chance. I know a lot of people who are just like, it's just straightforward rock and roll there. Nothing really means much to me. But listen to the lyrics. Just listen to Gord Downie's way of writing and then mix it with a phenomenal musical background. Oh, what a great band. So let's dive deep into this band. All right. So, enough chitter chatter. Let's get into business. The serious business of this video is answering the questions: why are they so popular in Canada and relatively unknown around the rest of the world? What makes them one of Canada's greatest band? And why are they so freaking good? Why are they so damn freaking good? So, in order to answer those questions, I got to fill some of you in who the Tragically Hip is, obviously, because some of you might never have heard the Tragically Hip. And if you haven't, I hope you go and listen to them after this. I really hope you do. So, let's start with the formation. So, the formation of the Tragically Hip is in 1984. So, before 1984, Gord Sinclair and Rob Baker were playing together as students in Kingston College. And they were playing together, and they participated in, I believe, KCVI. I think it's a radio station, not sure. But they had a variety show, and Gord Sinclair and Robbie Baker performed as the Rodents. At the same time, we had Gord Downie, the singer, and Johnny Fay, the drummer. They were doing stuff as well together. And in 1984, Gord Sinclair and Robbie Baker joined Gord Downie and Johnny Fay in 1984, and that made 4 members. That began the beginning of the Tragically Hip. Now, they did have this saxophonist for a little bit. He only stayed with them for 2 years, and then they finally get Paul Langlois in 1986. But from 1984 to 1986, they began starting to play a bunch of local gigs in Kingston. They began playing pubs and bars and universities and stuff like that. And I do have some hints and rumors that the Tragically Hip did come to my hometown university, Bishop's University, and played a gig there. I don't know if that was during this time or later on when they're first starting out. It was in their early formation years that they came around here. But I would have crapped my pants. That would have been an incredible show, especially because Gord Downie's such a showman, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. They then took their name. So I've heard 2 things. I've heard they took their name from either an Elvis Costello song, or they took their name from a skit in the Michael Nesmith movie Elephant Parts. So, I don't know exactly where they got their name, but they got an awesome name. It's a cool name. The Tragically Hip. That's a cool name. Anywho, so they eventually were seen by an MCA. They started getting bigger and bigger, and they finally were seen by MCA. So that's a big music company. They're associated with huge bands, and they were seen by the Vice President Bruce Dickinson. Obviously not the Iron Maiden Bruce Dickinson, but the Vice President, and he saw them at the Horseshoe Tavern. Now I'm going to post a photo here and here, a couple other photos throughout this little moment, because I went to the Horseshoe Tavern, and I've had a beer at the Horseshoe Tavern. I've never seen the show there, and I freaking want to so badly, but I've been to this place, and just the history on the walls they have there, the stage, just knowing that so much music history happened in that building, and knowing that this is where the Tragically Hip got their big start, it's crazy. So they finally got seen in the Horseshoe Tavern by a label rep. The rest is history. So from there, they were signed to a long-term record deal with MCA, and they recorded the EP, The Tragically Hip. So, this is the EP that they released in 1987. It consists of 8 songs, and it's relatively great, but it's, you definitely hear that they're a bar band at this time. So they released this album, The Tragically Hip. Now, once they release this album, people start getting wind of it. And this album produces 2 singles, Small Town Bring Down and Highway Girl. And Highway Girl is a song that is very well known nowadays, and it's a phenomenal one. So they followed up that with 1989. So they, obviously stuff's starting to happen. So they formed in 1984. 1986, the official lineup is solidified for the rest of their career. That is the lineup. They do not change lineups until, unfortunately, 2017, when we'll get to it. But they released this in 1987. 1989, they released this. Tragically Hip, Up to Here. This album blows them up. And the reason this blows them up is because they have produced 4 singles off this. They have Blow at High Dough, which we and my band play, and I love this song. One of my favorite songs of all time. There's a lot of those songs on that list, though. But they produced Blow at High Dough, New Orleans is Sinking, Boots and Hearts, and 38 Years Old. And you know what? All 4 of those tunes are radio. They're always on the radio. They're just radio mega hits. All 4 of these songs just keep, literally just pumped on radios all throughout Canada. And this is probably why so many people love them in Canada and so many people know of them in Canada, because Canadian DJs were just tragically hip, listen. So, obviously, this is what happens. Then, 1991, now they're hitting their stride. They're really getting going here. 1991, they released Road Apples. This is Road Apples, otherwise known as cow shit patties. That's what Road Apples mean. I never knew that until I looked up the name. So they released Road Apples, and things are really starting to get going now. This produces 3 singles, and it reaches number 1 in the Canadian record charts. Now, during this time, it doesn't really say what's going on in the rest of the world. Video footage that's out there, you can find a lot, but you don't find a lot outside of Canada. They're doing a lot in Canada, and they're huge in Canada. In 1991, they're massive in Canada, and they recorded Road Apples in New Orleans. So there definitely has to be some generation of fans. They're gathering fans in the rest of the world and in the U.S., but Canada, they're just number 1 in Canada. Hello, folks. Sorry for the interruption. I'm interrupting my own video here, but I'm just sitting here editing the video, and I was just curious. I looked up the Tragically Hip discography, and it blew my mind. And I want it to blow your mind as well, because this answers exactly how popular they were in Canada compared to the rest of the world. So, they had 13 studio albums, so we're looking at the studio albums. So, their first album, they released, full-length album, they released is Up to Here, released in 1989. I showed you that one already. And it goes number 9 in Canada, all right? In the U.S., it goes 170. What? That's crazy huge margin. Road Apples, number 1 in Canada. They don't even have the data. But it goes diamond in Canada, and you know how much diamond is? That is a lot. That's like 1 million. Maybe even 10 million. Not sure. But still, crazy. Fully Completely, 1992. Number 1 in Canada. Number 40 in the U.S. That is the chart that is the closest to number 1 is 40. Still a pretty big margin. 1994's Day for Night released, number 1 again. 70 in the Netherlands. No data available. 6 times platinum. Trouble at the Hen House, 1996, number 1 again in Canada, 134. And then it starts to sound like a broken record, because then it's, Phantom Power, number 1. Music at Work, number 1. Violet Light, number 1. In Between Evolution, number 1. In Violet Light, number 2, sorry. But then you look at the United States ones, and it's 134. Phantom Power, 143. Music at Work, 139. In Violet Light, 169. And then it blows my mind. So, it goes all the way to their last album, 2016, Man Machine Poem. Of course, number 1 in Canada, 179 in the US Billboard Top 200s. Man, it's crazy. So the first thing that blew my mind was every single studio album that Tragically Hip released, full length, is in the top 10. That's crazy. Second thing that blew my mind was that 9 albums out of 13 were number 1 albums in Canada. And then third thing that blew my mind is the margins. It's crazy how extremely more popular they were in Canada than the rest of the world. You even go look down at the live albums. Number 1 in Canada, number 5 in Canada. You look at the box set, number 4 in Canada. Look at the extended plays. The first EP, 72. That makes sense because they're coming out of nowhere. This brand new band, but in 2 years, they're already at number 9 in the charts when Up to Here gets released. Saskadelphia, their latest EP, sorry, number 2. Folks, you cannot lie. The numbers do not lie. They were significantly more popular in Canada than in the rest of the world. There you go. There's the proof, folks. Back to the video. During the Road Apples tour, Downey became recognized for his ranting and telling fictional stories, and this is where I believe the reason why they are known as Canada's greatest band, one of Canada's greatest bands, forms. I believe it has a lot to do with Gord Downey's incredible stage performance. I've seen the Tragically Hip twice, and it was in the later years. It was the first time was in 2013, and the second time was in 2015. And it blew me away. The guy, they're just phenomenal live, and it was just a non-stop party. Even in their 40s and 50s, these guys were just rocking and kicking ass, and Gord is just such a charismatic person, and I think this is why they are often labeled as one of Canada's greatest bands, because he just has this thing. So if you go back, I highly recommend it. I'll leave a couple links in the description down below. Go check them out. I'll put them. There's some videos out there where you see Gord Downie, and he's flailing around, he's saying random crap, he's telling stories, he's going off on tangents, it's freaking great, and watching that, my mouth just drops on it. Wow, there's no words. Imagine being in that crowd. So this is what I think when people say one of Canada's greatest bands, it's because of the show these guys put on. And it's because of Gord Downie's just nature on stage. He really just feels the music so much that he just blurts out the first thing that comes to his mouth. And it's kind of interesting. You go back and listen to old live recordings, and you hear a lot of lyrics that are used in later albums coming out when he's saying stuff. So we'll get into that a little bit later on. So after that, especially during Highway Girl and New Orleans is Sinking, those two songs he really lets go. There's a recording right here that just came out recently, and this was recorded in 1991. So this is right after Road Apples is released. It's live at the Roxy in LA. So obviously they do have, they are producing music outside Canada, and I do believe that they had good success outside of Canada, but Canada, we love this. We breathe the Tragically Hip, apparently. But this, you listen to Highway Girl, and then you listen to New Orleans Sinking, and the Killer Whale Tank story is on here, and the stories this guy says is just phenomenal. And I think that's one of the main reasons, and that's one of the answers, I believe, is he was they're such good showmen, and just the fact that the band would just groove, rock out, and jam, and Gord's going on a tangent, he's speaking thousands of words a second, he's going off on a huge story, and the band's just solid. And I think that's what makes them one of Canada's greatest bands, is just a show. So, now that I've answered one question, I still got to answer the next question. Why were they so popular in Canada and not as popular in the rest of the world? Well, I've already answered that question. Because Canada just threw up the Tragically Hip on radio, on TV. They were huge in Canada. They were their third album, second official album, sorry, but their third release, number 1, whereas the rest of the world, I don't know exactly how it did, but anyways, Road Apples was planned to be a double album, actually, and that was cool. So they released this, called Saskadelphia, recently as well, and this only has 4 songs on it, but these 6 songs. These 6 songs were meant to be on Road Apples, but the label didn't think it was a good idea to release 2 albums. It blows my mind that they didn't achieve a lot of international success, because their first 2 albums are phenomenal. It's crazy. They were huge in the 90s late 80s, early 90s in Canada. But the rest of the world was kind of like, yeah, they're good, but like, why are you freaking out about them? And I don't know. It's a strange thing that I'll never understand. But anywho, they keep rocking on, and then a year later they released this, Fully Completely, one of the greatest Canadian albums of all time. As you can tell by the poster right back here, it's the cover of the album. So they released this, which produces more hits at Courage, Locked in the Trunk of the Car, at the 100th Meridian, and there's 3 other singles on here, which, Wheat Kings, Fully Completely, 50 Mission Cap, Pigeon Cameras. Wow, phenomenal album. So if you don't have that one and you want a good starting point, go listen to that one. Road Apples is a very close second. And then the sound on this album displayed less of the blues, so they kind of removed the blues ting to maybe see if they can break into the other markets, because it's kind of weird music in Canada. It's like Rush was massive in Canada, massive in the rest of the world. Triumph was pretty big, huge in the States and the rest of the world, but less so in Canada. You don't hear much about them. Whereas like band like Tragically Hip, man, they're all their age in Canada, but the rest of the world's kind of, it's not hearing about them. It's strange. It's weird how the Canadian market is so hard to punch your way out of to get into the mainstream market, and that's the thing that a lot of bands deal with, and it's unfortunate, but they loved being Canada's band. They love it. And then the next album comes out, and this is Day for Night. Day for Night comes out, phenomenal album. Then following that, we have 1996. We have Trouble at the Hen House, which does all right. It's kind of a little underrated, but it's got some great, phenomenal tunes. Like Ahead by a Century is one of their biggest songs, and that's on there as well. And then they release Phantom Power in 1998, and then the 90s are done. Then finally, they start getting recognized in the rest of the world, and I mentioned it already in my Woodstock 99 videos way back then, but they played Woodstock 99, and I talk about that whole set in that video, but it's one of my favorite sets of all time, and I watch it at least once a month. I watch it from start to finish. It's phenomenal. And they finally really started getting recognition outside of Canada. And, but they're still huge in Canada. Like, all the albums so far have been reaching number 1 or number 2. Like, they're in the top 10 in Canada, every single album they release. Then they continue releasing music and music and music and music and music and music until finally they stopped in 2017. Now, finally, I got to see them in 2013, and then in 2015, I got to see them again, and then, unfortunately, 2016, they announced the last tour. And when I saw Gord Downie the last time, in 2015, he already had what was obviously his demise already happening inside him. And then they did one last tour in 2016, and they released Man Machine Poem, which is a phenomenal album, and then he passed away. He died of terminal brain cancer shortly after in 2017, but not before they played their final show in the hometown of Kingston on August 20th, 2016, and I cried like a baby. I watched that. The concert was aired on CBC, which is the big broadcasting company here. The concert featured 30 songs and 3 encores. 3 encore sets, with the band finishing with a performance of Ahead by a Century, which I will never forget. Gord screaming and crying on that thing. And the broadcast was streamed at total uninterrupted, no advertisements, nothing, and it was watched by 11.7 million people. That's 1/3 of the Canadian population. 1/3. That's insane. Unfortunately, he passed away October 17th, 2017. So, that's the quick, brief history. It's hard to do a brief history, but I think I answered all my questions there. So, going back to the questions, which was, why is the Tragically Hip have such a huge cult following in Canada? Why are they so popular in Canada and not necessarily popular all over around the rest of the world? And number 3, what makes them one of Canada's greatest bands? So where I think the first question that I can answer is, why do they have such a cult following in Canada? Well, it's quite simple, really. The music was pumped out to Canadians for years on the radio. Boom, boom, boom. Listen to this, listen to this, listen to this. And not necessarily or around the rest of the world, which also leaks into question 2 a bit of why they're so popular in Canada. I believe they have such a cult following in Canada because they're so Canadian. Their lyrics. So I'll post an example of a lyric sheet right here. This is going to be Wheat Kings, okay? Okay, in Wheat Kings, it mentions CBC, which is the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. Then it mentions the Prime Minister. Then it mentions, Wheat Kings. Saskatchewan is just fields of wheat. There's a lot of, the story of the song is about this guy who's wrongfully accused, and, the whole story is based on a real Canadian event. That's just one example. But I'd say a good portion of the Tragically Hip songs have some sort of mention of a Canadian city, a Canadian politician, a Canadian figure, maybe a hockey player or something like that, like 50 Mission Cap, talking about some hockey player who played with the Toronto Maple Leafs and went missing. 38 years old is about a prison, something to do with a prison in Millhaven, Ontario. So, that's why I think they have such a cult following in Canada, is because they're just so Canadian. They mention things that relate so much to Canada. And I think that's why they are so popular in Canada and not necessarily popular in the rest of the world and the rest of the music industry, is because they can't relate to it. On most every single song, there's a mention of some sort of Canadian thing, an event that happened, some sort of politician. There's always a mention of something that us as Canadians can relate to, even if it's just CBC. I've watched CBC, and the fact that this song says late breaking story on the CBC, I'm like, oh, I can relate to that because, hey, I've watched CBC and I've seen, that there's news stories on there. And so I think that's why there's such a big cult following around the Tragically Hip, and I think that's why they're so popular in Canada, is because they just are so relatable to Canadians. I'll post a bunch of examples of lyrics here and there, and you'll see some really huge lyrical relatabilities to me, but to everyone, Maybe I'm looking into it a little bit too much, but I believe that's why they're so popular in Canada, and not necessarily because they were less played in other parts of the world. I think it's more because for Canadians, they're so relatable. And that's when, how it's like Americana. I believe they're Canadiana. I don't know if that's the term. But their music is just so Canadian. And I don't know, it just sounds Canadian. Like Wheat Kings, it's got the loons. And it's very, melodic. I can feel myself walking through wheat fields in Saskatchewan. And I love this band. And I understand why they have such a cult following, and I've answered the question. Why are they so popular in Canada and not the rest of the world? The last question is, why are they known as Why are they known as one of Canada's greatest bands? And that answer is fairly simple as well, because you take what I just said, all that stuff, the Canadiana of it, the relatableness of their music to Canadians. What makes them one of Canada's greatest bands? Well, because they relate to us. They're Canadian, just like us, and they're saying stuff that we would like to say as well, and we can't, or we haven't, or something like that. But I feel like the reason why they're labeled as one of Canada's greatest bands is all the reason I've given, but also their stage show. And Gord Downie, we saw Gord Downie in his prime. Obviously they were touring US and stuff like that, but I don't think they necessarily got it, Obviously the people, Live at the Roxy is in LA. Obviously, they had fans elsewhere around the world. I'm not saying they don't have any fans or people who like them, but the main demographic for the Tragically Hip has always been Canada. And the reasons why is because they're so relatable to Canadians. Their music is freaking crazy awesome. Gord Downie is a lunatic on stage. Not necessarily lunatic, like, as a, bad. Like, he's just crazy on stage. He's going off in tangents. He's saying random words. And, like, it's just... I think that's why they're labeled Canada's greatest band. One of Canada's greatest bands, because they've changed the country so much musically. And, the live show is just so unique. And, like, if you saw the Tragically Hip, man, you were in for a show. And when I saw the Tragically Hip, I was blown away with the show. It was phenomenal. So, all that to say, I think the Tragically Hip is one of the damn best, greatest Canadian bands of all time. I think when people say, Tragically Hip's one of the greatest Canadian rock bands of all time, I'm not going to disagree, because I agree with that statement 100%. And that's all I gotta say on today's deep dive of why the Tragically Hip is so freaking awesome, and why are they one of Canada's greatest bands. Thank you for tuning in today. If you want to know more about the Tragically Hip, go do some research. And I've seen the Tragically Hip live, and I understand the feeling of being at a Tragically Hip show. It's just such a party. It's a party and a half. It was pouring rain. The second time I saw them in 2015, it was pouring rain. Like, literally, torrential downpour. And, like, Gord Downie dropped the mic in the water. And he was like, and then, like, the front of the stage was just puddles. Like, they had videos so the crowd could see from far, and you'd see when they do, like, side shots, there's puddles on the stage. And Gord Downie takes his towel, he's whipping it around, and he throws it on the ground, and he's, like, mopping the floor with the towel on his feet. That's one show. They did this for 30 plus years. And, it's such a shame that Gord Downie had to pass away and he's done so much for Canada too. So I think that's another reason why, another reason why they're so popular and sought after and praised in Canada, is for the work that the whole band's done, but more specifically Gord Downie has done as an individual for the Native Americans. The natives, he's done a lot of work. He's a big advocate of helping them out. He created a whole album with a story, and vinyl and CD, and like a whole comic book thing called The Secret Path, and it goes to all the funds of that went to the Downie Wenjack Foundation, and he's a Canadian hero. All the people who went to fight in wars, they're Canadian heroes, but I think Gord Downie's a Canadian hero in a different way. And so if you don't know the Tragically Hip, go take a listen to them, give them a try. Even if you're not Canadian, check them out, they're phenomenal. So, without further ado, thank you for tuning in. I know it's been a longer one, but these deep dive videos I feel like are going to be a little longer, because I'm diving deeper into a topic. And I'm going to, it probably won't be a weekly thing, this video. It's probably going to be like a monthly thing. Anywho, thank you all for watching it. I much appreciate the love and support on YouTube. Much appreciated. Anyways, thank you for watching. Peace. See you on the next video of Tunage, where the music never stops. Thank you. Bye. Peace.